Man, I can't believe they're going to screw this up.
Hey, what's happening now?
Well, there's been a couple of snags in the plan to reopen Portage and Main to pedestrians. Mayor Scott Gillingham is still very supportive. An executive policy committee has signed off, but some of the private landowners are expressing concern about closing the underground concourse permanently, which is part of Gillingham's master plan.
Oh, no. What do you think the odds are of the intersection still opening?
Well, it's funny you should ask me that. Let's check into my favorite sports betting site. They also offer odds on major news stories.
Portage and Main reopening is now at negative 220, but that's down significantly from the negative 380 odds just a week ago. The best odds are being offered right now for the 3-event same-game parlay. A $100 bet can earn you $650 if Mayor Scott Gillingham jumps the barriers and walks across the intersection to prove how safe it is. The barriers come down, and Councillor Jeff Broarty covers his face with his hands at least 3 times during the final vote.
Wow, I don't know whether to lay a bet or cry.
The Winnipeg Free Press proudly presents, in partnership with CJNU 93.7 FM, Nigan and the Lone Ranger. Here are your hosts, Nigan Sinclair and Dan the Lone Ranger Lett.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Nigan and the Lone Ranger. This is the second consecutive episode where I am actually joined in person by my partner.
I'm here.
That's right.
I'm here.
In person. The fact that you're not traveling and are actually available in the studio, it's threatening to become like a regular thing.
What if we were in the same postal code for 2 weeks in a row and we're finding out right now?
Well, yeah, the creative energy, it's almost too much to be contained within the CGNU studio.
Sarcasm.
Yeah, it's kind of it's good. I think we're started to the audience. Side note, we've fallen into an every 2 weeks cadence, which is not to say that we won't do one every week. But
the election has certainly. I mean, when we were doing the shows for the election,
5-6 in a row,
really had to be on top of issues, and it got to the point where as soon as we taped, the show was almost kind of out of date by the time it came out the next day, because the issues were coming out so quickly. And I think some of that pressure has been off, but we'd like to get back to once a week if we can. But right now, once every 2 weeks.
Well, I travel much less than you, and I will say my life is way more pleasurable at once every 2 weeks. But
it's evident.
Yeah, but my work ethic tells me that we need to,
What I would say is that the podcast normally deals with news. News is a very big thing, and it means right now. But more current affairs. It's that little bit more broad, which I find interesting. Speaking of news, though... Yeah, in the corner of the studio here, we actually have a teletype. And I just got some information coming in. It seems to be from a reputable source. Breaking news from the National Newspaper Awards. Free Press columnist Nigan Sinclair has been nominated for a National Newspaper Award in the columnists category. It is his second nomination. Sinclair won in 2019 in the same category in his first full year of column writing. Stop.
How did this happen? How did this terrible mistake occur?
Well, that's the John Lithgow acceptance speech. You've made a horrible mistake. No, congrats, man. And your first full year as a columnist, you were nominated in column writing, which is really a hard category, and you won. Show off. And and now you've been nominated again. And I would say as well too for writing about Manitoba politics, which is
shocking.
Shocking, catching the attention of people at the Canadian Newspapers Association on a topic like Manitoba politics is I think you need to open up an advertising firm, a marketing firm or something, it's amazing, man.
It is a huge shock when I woke up yesterday morning and sort of saw this cacophony on formerly known as Twitter. The Free Press has just consistently outclasses in so many different places across the country. It's just really impressive. A few other nominations too at the Free Press. Free Press got 4 nominations. Our colleague Melissa Martin, who's on leave at the Free Press, John Woods for his great photos work, and then our investigation on the terrible tragedy in Carberry. And so just congratulations to all of our colleagues in the Free Press for their great work.
I think it's fair to say that the Free Press, as a reflection of Winnipeg, just like the city, punching above its weight.
I think that's the way we can, we are really the only newspaper of our size that consistently produces this number of awards. But lest people think that the podcast is only about ourselves and the sound of backs being patted.
What I will say, though, is, Nigan, they like you. They really like you.
That's right.
I will say one thing. Our podcast with John K. Sampson last week, or a few weeks ago, was just
rocked.
really, really well done. And I was just thanks again to John for coming in and spending the morning talking about libraries. Who would have thought libraries would be such a great conversation piece? I know you thought that. I'm not sure that others who
related
we
to a librarian, though, I'm not. It's not fair.
Shortly after that conversation, my wife and I both went down to the Millennium Library for Seedy Saturday, the swap of garden seeds and all sorts of interesting things, and it was a hub of activity and proof, if proof were needed, that it really, really is part of the soul of the community, as we were saying.
I love that metaphor. And we're going to continue in many ways that conversation and really talk deeply into the issues of mental health in our community and the responses that have been to situations of crisis of mental health, particularly by policing. We have two really great guests in the studio for today. Kate Kehler has long history with the John Howard Society, working with people who have come from places like prison and reintegrated into the community. She's executive director of the Social Planning Council of Winnipeg and has recently written a paper, co-written some work with the Police Accountability Coalition. Kate, great to have you here in studio.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
And sitting alongside in the other hot seat in the studio, the CJNU studios, here is Greg Burnett. Greg comes to us from having been retired from the Winnipeg Police Service about 7 years ago, and having been at the rank of superintendent, is currently the executive director of the Downtown Community Safety Patrol, who we've had lots of focus on. A few seasons ago, we had Mark Chipman at the sort of birth of the Downtown Community Safety Patrol as talking about the work that they've done. We're now a few years into that. Greg, it's nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me, and congratulations.
Oh, thanks so much.
I think that we obviously, we try not to bring our guests in completely cold with no preparation, and we want to make sure they know they're working with a net on these things. So there have been conversations that have taken place. Kate and I have exchanged emails. Greg and I had a long conversation. I think that the first thing we really need to establish is, what it is we're trying to do, like what we're responding to, because there is a really broad spectrum of kinds of calls or events or incidents that government, for lack of a better term, but government and the services that support government are trying to respond to. So, Greg, first off, because you manage the DCSP. And let's talk about the range of things that your people respond to in the downtown.
It's all kinds of things and all kinds of safety to everybody downtown, right? Whether, again, living, learning, playing. But one of our biggest demographic is those who suffer with mental health addictions and are, quite frankly, looking for any type of help or resources out there. They're lost and invisible, and that's wrong, and we're trying to correct that.
So, and for somebody who may be suffering with those kinds of problems, though, there's even a sub-spectrum then from, maybe disoriented to, potentially volatile. So, what is the range that your people see on a regular basis?
We'll see everything from a person in crisis at the time, whether it's yelling or shouting in a skywalk or on the streets, to somebody who may be passed out, in need of help. It may be somebody who's seeking refuge under a stairwell or in a back lane behind a BFI. We go to great lengths to find folks and get them safe places. And then it's also providing safe walks to people, courtesy walks and safe stands, and helping people in that way. And then working closely with all our partners out there, including Winnipeg Police Service, Fire Paramedic Service, other social sector agencies, again, to try and find people the right resources they need at the right time. line. We have 3 teams out there right now. That's our MAC team, are highly trained in first aid, provide those kinds of help and supports to folks. And then our Connect team are almost ambassadors, but entry-level folks who come in and help and provide extra eye and ears in the community. And then our core team are social navigators. So when we do find somebody who may have fallen through those cracks, we're able to find them some supports and get them to the right agency or program that they can get further supports, whether that's housing, detox, employment, EI, whatever it might be.
Could I step in for just a little bit of information, just again to kind of situate it for your audience? I think it's really important to remember that the downtown Winnipeg is part of Winnipeg Centre, the federal riding which has long had the highest rates of child and family poverty across Canada. It's the urban federal riding with the highest rates. So those children grow up into adults who struggle, just as Greg is suggesting here, because we know the damaging effects of poverty on people's mental health and especially childhood development. Our numbers for children under the age of 6 who are growing up in poverty are horrible and are completely avoidable. But we understand that affects brain development. So for folks out there who are listening to this who are thinking that the people that Greg are dealing with are somehow at fault, they are not. No, absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the evidence is. I think Greg said something just a minute ago that was really crucial. People who are not seen maybe by Winnipeggers, and then therefore that's a production of trauma. And so therefore people might we have a city councilor who regularly says nobody lives downtown. And the whole problem is absolutely people live downtown. They just don't look like those who live in Tuxedo or in Charleswood or Transcona. There are sometimes people who are living in tents. There's sometimes people who are sleeping outside, living in a bus shack, for example. These are people who are, for one reason or another, have had a situation not by their own choice, but are in situations of trauma. And that produces more and more challenges for mental health. And I too patrol the downtown, with the Mama Bear Clan, and I can say first off that the number one thing we deal with are situations of mental health, are people who have been in chronic crisis for a long period of time, and it takes a very steady hand, does it not?
Absolutely. I give our folks all the credit in the world. I mean, one of the things, and you touched on that, unseen, and then unfortunately when they are seen, it's with judgment, right? And people project this kind of negative image on it. And so with our folks, we go to great lengths to make them feel real, human, and again, our folks, a lot of lived experience there. So they walk those journeys and walk those paths and are able to relate with folks out there in the street. And we talk about crisis and everything else. And we do a lot better, again, I like pre-crisis or whatever. We're developing those relationships early on. Hopefully you can have an effect.
100%. I can tell you firsthand experience dealing with every single person, 100% of, and I've had, I'm going to say about 36 engagements with the DCSP, 100% kind, good, giving people, people like Mitch Bourbonniere, who just long time advocate for the downtown. Kate, tell us a little bit about, you're a part of this group called the Police Accountability Coalition. I think that's come up recently because we've had a number of incidents that have turned violent because police are often the first responders. And you can argue equipped or ill-equipped to deal with the chronic issues of mental health, particularly in the downtown, but also throughout the rest of the city. There was a particularly wide-known incident that was out near the University of Manitoba involving a young man who was in very serious crisis, and it escalated to a point of a death. Why the Police Accountability Coalition? What was the impetus of that organization? And then maybe talk briefly about some of the work that you're doing, talking about or writing about what the work police should be doing in relation to mental health.
Sure. So the Police Accountability came together actually in 2020. It was led by Louise Mbundamwe because people think it's automatically associated with the death of George Floyd. That was happening at the same time, but actually it came out more of the fact that the province was actually doing a review of the Police Service Act. And they had done a fairly good job of engaging with Indigenous governance organizations, the larger ones, but hadn't actually spoken to a lot of the grassroots organizations. They also had not spoken to any Black-led organizations. So that was a failure that they noted when we brought it up to them. They were like, yes. And so Justice has tried to engage. with the Police Accountability Coalition. But what we did is we came together as 100 organizations, community-based organizations, with 23 recommendations from all different levels of government of how the police can be more accountable, be more effective, and we can actually get better and safer communities for everyone.
So the main problem really is quite simple. It is that people who are in crisis, people like what Greg's speaking about, are oftentimes encountering police officers, and the situations become quite escalated very quickly. For what reason? What do you think is one of the challenges that when a police officer is put into a situation in which he or she or they are dealing with a situation of mental health, why do you think it escalates so quickly?
There's a number of different reasons. So first of all, the main goal of a community-led crisis response unit would actually be that somebody in medical distress gets a medical response first, not a law enforcement response first. Law enforcement should only come in when they're necessary. So what the research shows is that actually the police presence themselves can actually escalate somebody. Somebody who's had a previous bad experience with police will automatically or could automatically escalate. It doesn't matter if they're the nicest police officer on the face of the earth who go in there with all the best intentions. They go in there fully armed in the uniform and that can escalate somebody. There's also people who come from different countries who have also terrible experiences with police in their own country. So they're not a trusted force. They're not a trusted organization. So that is what the evidence is showing more and more, that what is needed is for people to be met at their own level. And we also have an issue with policing. Our police are overtasked. They have too much to do, and therefore they cannot take the time that a community-based organization can do to speak to somebody. So when you think of the incident out at U of M, it was 9 seconds from the time the door was knocked on to Mr. Oposo being killed in that encounter. So, the ability of community crisis response units to be able to take far more time, let the police do what the police do. And if that community crisis team feels that, this situation is unsafe, then they can call in the police, and we have to have a way of working with the police so they don't come in and take over. They actually come in and they are there to support the work that's already happening. So I think it's a combination of not having enough time, not having the full training for it. Police also have competing training. They have their officer safety training. They have all that competes.
Use of lethal force training.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It competes with the goal of keeping this other person safe. And that is what the situation we have right now is that it comes down to the fact that we've prioritized some lives over the lives of others.
So, Greg, you and I talked about this a bit offline. You, in your career as a police officer, you had some training in crisis intervention, which I think we agreed would be a great thing if we could extend to more people.
For sure.
Yeah. But we also talked about we're trying to plan the resources, but the problem, of course, is the way we read situations, the way they're assessed. And, I think there was the incident on New Year's Eve with the university student, that resulted in a fatal shooting. And then a little while later, there was an incident on Magnus Avenue with a 59-year-old man who was the subject of an involuntary mental health examination order. Both that also ended in a police shooting. So I guess the question is, without assigning sort of blame to anybody, but is one of the issues here just that we need to be more sophisticated in how we're assessing these events?
Absolutely. And I think when we look at this, and again, if I'm talking about the work that DCSB is doing, we provide that situational awareness training so our folks know we're in a situation which may require police or medical or whatever the case may be, and do those proper assessments. We actually get some training with the police on crisis intervention and how to de-escalate things like active listening and those types of stuff. So again, our folks are well aware so they can make those kinds of triaging right at the scene. But even before that, when we go into the 911 calls and as calls come through there to the PSAP system, right, whether it goes to the police, whether it goes to the fire paramedic, and we're in the process of actually integrating with fire paramedics.
Yeah.
So we're able to take a lot of those calls off their plate, and vice versa. And even with the police at some point in time, and on the streets right now, if they need us, they'll call us or we'll call them as necessary.
Well, both Downtown Safety and ARC have been successful at not just taking stuff off, police and fire and paramedic, but cutting down on hospital transportations, getting people to medical or psychological support without an ambulance, having to be restrained and things like that. Like I thought that the numbers should probably be better in terms of the outcomes, but it's not just about taking stuff off the plate, but it's also, in fact, like just preventing people from becoming drawn into a system where they're going to get a whole bunch of stuff they probably don't need.
Yeah. I think it's really important that we talk about language when you mentioned like crisis isn't automatically threatening. Like that's the idea. And unfortunately, the way it's assessed now is that a crisis is automatically deemed to be a threat. And it's responded to in that way. So just if I could add a little bit more to the previous point about the problem of police responding, being the first responders, there is, they still use the antiquated idea of, the excited delirium, which has been basically debunked across everywhere. But what has happened is they've taken the same symptoms and just rolled them into another name, and they're responding in the same way. So when you walk into a situation and you automatically assume this person is a threat, you are going to act that way. It's going to be in your body language. And even when they don't end in terrible situations, even just being shut down, and somebody in crisis can be completely intimidated into cooperating, but they're not cooperating. They're being forced to comply, and that is damaging in itself. So it doesn't even everybody can walk away safely from a situation, but is that really what we want? There was a wrap of another inquest into 5 police-involved deaths just a little while ago. It was in the Free Press. And the use of force officer that they brought in, the expert they brought in to testify, their response basically was, well, in these situations, all we need to do is send more police and get the paramedics there faster so the person can be subdued and then medicated. That, to me, is not an appropriate response for everybody. If that's what we're going to do, if we're going to just start taking people down, then we're going to do a lot more damage.
No, I mean, the solution for violence isn't more violence.
Yeah.
And most people who have experienced violence, particularly when they're presented with an image of violence, doesn't create a sense of safety that would be then necessary to de-escalate a mental health situation. So the solution that the police have come up with, Shared Health has joined with them is the ARC. We've said this a few times, but what ARC stands for is the Alternative Response to Citizens in Crisis. Most Winnipeggers, I don't think, know about this. It's fairly new, but can you explain quickly about what the ARC program is designed to do, and then what it hopes to do, and then what it maybe doesn't do?
Greg might have a little bit more detail on some of the calls, but this is our understanding from the position paper that we wrote, that it is the response is primarily through 911. You would call in and say, this person is in crisis, I need help. It is still primarily General Patrol that shows up, and they make the decision whether or not to call in ARC. That is the way it's set up. You can get to ARC immediately through the Shared Health and their crisis unit, and that's another access point for the ARC team. But it is still a police officer with a clinician going, and their approach. And if people out there is actually a pilot report based on the pilot project. It's a very odd thing because there seems to be a complete disconnect when they say they go to these events, and somehow ARC is not a police response. That's what Shared's Health quote was at the time when they launched the program. It's like, we send ARC because otherwise a police response would be required. ARC has a police officer, so it is a police response. The police officer is not in their full uniform, but they wear militarized jackets. With the flak type jackets and vest with police emblazoned on them and ARC, and their weapons are on full display. So I don't see that as being less intimidating. And even the clinician wears a flak type jacket and things like that. So it's a power response, and it immediately creates a power imbalance, as opposed to the other not civilian led ones. We now have 107 across Canada and the United States who are doing a completely civilian led first response. So there are alternatives out there.
So, okay, so you mentioned Toronto, though, and I did quite a bit of reading about it. There is still, like, in their, so their community safety...
Toronto...
Community crisis.
Community crisis response. So...
service.
Yeah, service.
TCCS.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think that it is... so this is a, social workers, mental health experts, some clinicians, but not there aren't enough clinicians to go around for these things.
No, we need more.
And they have a separate call-in, 211, to access this service. There still is a triage system there that is not dissimilar to we may not have the exact kind of response, but there still is a police-led triage on the dispatch of the calls. And I guess, and I'm not bringing this up to contest anything you've said, but to sort of say, okay, so we have a version of a let's say a de-emphasized or de-amplified police response. It doesn't go all the way to a completely civilian response, but the system for managing that resource, and let's face it, like bigger city, way more people, like it's a much bigger entity, is not dissimilar, which seems to get, like, I do want to support one of the things you just said, which is police making the decisions about what kind of a response is necessary.
It's interesting. So they got formed and we actually collaborated with those folks at Birchall's. We shared notes and talked and that helped form, and we helped form them with them, their processes. But even before that, I would point out a program in Edmonton through Reach Edmonton. And again, it's the same kind of program where they have, again, through 211 and community calls, and I think they're a 24/7 mobile crisis response team. So another team. So there are lots of agencies out there that we've taken, and there's differences in all. We're hoping, it's kind of feeling like we're a little secret out there with our own ranks, but
you guys all know of each other, though, which is the more important
absolutely
thing, right?
I mean, we've talked to people all over the country and different ways to do things and everything else, but one of the things we've got, we had over 13,000 calls from the community over the last 2 years, about 75% of those in the last year, as we've built that credibility within the unit. So people are calling us rather than police. We have 211 as a partner to helpfully get calls through there. And then as we build again with 911 and fire paramedic to start. So we're on, I think, a really good path here to build something really good.
Yeah. The difference with Toronto, though, could I just step in, is like the pilot project for Toronto very specifically identified 4 areas of the city, and they partnered with 4 different community-based organizations. So yes, of course, 911 is an access point, but 211 is gaining ground, but also people could actually call the organization itself that they were already familiar with, because if you're a good community-based organization, people know your number. They call there. You're already a trusted resource. So those teams are paired with like somebody who was already present in that organization.
Right.
And then they would bring in the additional clinician help, whomever they could, the extra expertise that they would need. So it's like an outreach worker that already has relationship with a lot of the people who are already struggling.
Exactly.
Greg, you meet the same people over and over again.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's what it is. So they have a relationship, and then they have that medical expertise. And so I think it's really important in the pilot project to mention is like they responded to, they could complete about 6,300 calls. The TCCS team only called police themselves in 240 of those cases. So they resolved all of the other ones without any police involvement.
Yeah, no, I think I haven't read anything or talked to anybody yet working on this story that doesn't believe that if you had the resources to do a massive expansion of a civilian-led response, because DCSP is essentially a civilian response.
You're not for profit incorporated, right?
Yeah. I think that everybody understands that there are so many situations that can be diffused and treated before it ever got to the point of having to consider another response. But I think that understanding actually brings us back to the part of I would argue the part of the story which is nobody wants to really discuss, which is at the moment that a really volatile crisis erupts where the person involved is a threat to themselves or a threat to other people. What do we do at that point? And I can't I think we need to know so much more information about New Year's Eve and the whole thing is just so muddy right now. Magnus Avenue, though, is a really interesting study because police searched for the man for days after the issue or the order was issued under the Mental Health Act. They finally got a report that he was back at his house, so they attended to his house in again, the details are entirely known, but it appeared to have been a tactical response. So the question that I raised, and Greg and I talked about this a little bit, is, okay, we know somebody's there. Obviously, their behavior had to alarm someone, friend, family, whatever, for them to seek this order. So we know the potential for volatility is there. But what kind of a response do we send then? I think we know, asked and answered, person on the street who's disoriented or possibly, in the midst of a crisis, they could be dealt with outside the stream of police contact with much better outcomes. Absolutely. But where we're not is a report of a university student with a knife, in an agitated state, or this other situation. I have trouble believing, and I will be paying close attention to any inquest on Magnus Avenue about why it was a police response initially and not where they wouldn't have at least tried, even ARC. Like if they would not have tried an ARC response or some other, but, I guess in a future perfect world where someone with mental health and crisis intervention training would be going and leading and informing what happens next. But Greg and I talked about this. I have not found a jurisdiction anywhere in the world that does that, where they will put someone with mental health or crisis intervention, a non-police person, near the tip of the spear. Sorry to use the violent imagery, but in a situation where it could go either way. And I really think that's a situation we haven't talked about. I mean, and I don't blame police for this, because they're doing what they think they need to do. But is this something that we need to talk about, Greg?
No question. I mean, this is the whole idea of communication, collaboration, and talking these things out. When we have those awful, tragic incidents, is to get together. Okay, how do you do things better? I mean, I don't know enough about either of those cases, but anytime there's a death involved in it, and I've been involved in those, through my career, I've seen too much, and I know there's always a way to debrief these things and find different ways, better ways, leading practices that we can follow. So if this is one of those conversations to lead to that, then great. That's my hope.
The Mama Bear Clan, which I would just point out that costs about the price of a police officer and a half, is sending out people, multiple walks, currently, going through funding crises, which is ironic because I think that, as I just mentioned a minute ago, would be not very expensive to be able to fund and adequately support. Does 4 things that almost nobody else does. And I include church missions in this. There's a respect, meaning that we come to people, we don't expect them to come to us. We go to people, much like we do with elders at a feast. We bring them the food. Second is we tell people that they're loved and that they're seen, and that we don't expect people to perform in a particular way, sit for a sermon, for example, or have to act in some kind of, work with where they're at, a non-judgmental response. We offer resources that are very specific to the areas that are key to that. And then 4th is opportunity, which is things like a smudge is available if you wish, or songs, or an element of tradition that might be otherwise useful. None of the police doesn't offer any of those things. In fact, I'd say for 2 of those 4, they do antithetical work to that and are trained to do that antithetical work. And again, not judging, because I know many police officers. What I say to police officers is not one Indigenous person ever thinks that you are there to help them. They immediately think that, what trouble am I in?
Yep.
That's the first. And I'm a person that should in many ways react differently, but even I think that. Especially when I had long hair. I've been stopped because I resemble a suspect more than a dozen times in my life because I was driving through an area of town. Is it that we need to give police officers more training? If we're not going to be able to do this, person beside them encountering people in mental health crisis? Will police ever be able to get to a point of being offered these things that are de-escalating situations like the Mama Bear Clan, which is an Indigenous-led organization? Because I can't see police officers perhaps wanting a civilian to be accompanying them at the front line of those encounters. Or is it we just reached a breaking point? Kate?
Yeah, that's I do want to acknowledge that we are at that really hard discussion point. But that's why I said earlier, it's like we are prioritizing some lives over those of others. Absolutely. And so that is something we just have to be very straightforward about that. And our current approach prioritizes the people who work in the system as opposed to the people the system is supposed to serve. So, and that goes for shared health as well as the police. This isn't all on the police. Both those systems, health and justice, are very hierarchical, very authoritative. That is their mindset. That is how they function. And what Nigan is explaining is an entirely different approach. So when somebody is, does actually become a real threat, could somebody get hurt? Yes, that could happen. But again, what we're trying to say is that the chances are less likely if it's not a threat present in front of that person. If they don't see the person as a threat, and they're actually really there to help, then that lowers the threat level right away.
Yeah.
I lost the other point.
But I think that there is no doubt, like the law of probability and all of the research that we know, like you can't find a study anywhere on this issue that doesn't conclude that when you remove uniforms and weapons away from, situations like this, you get fewer negative outcomes. In the United Kingdom, where even when police respond initially, most police are unarmed. They are in uniform, but they are unarmed. And so in a country that has more than twice the population of Canada, there are fewer people who die from confrontations with police in the United Kingdom than there are here. Now, there still are deaths, and the deaths come in other forms. Some are related to tasers. Some are related to police tools that became popular during the pandemic, like the spit hoods, which produce some very unintended consequences, and just the issue of physical restraint, George Floyd type situation. So there's a number of different ways these things can go wrong. So that point, absolutely. But I think that and there's no argument for not massively increasing the resources to do exactly what you're talking about doing. But the thing that I fear is, and I'll recall a quote by Chief Danny Smythe briefly. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the chief because there's a new regime, coming in soon. But his comment was that other than a mental health clinician, the next best trained people to respond to a mental health crisis are the police. And I think that I understand what he's trying to say. But I also think that there's a fallacy built into that, which is, and again, I'm going to suggest in fairness, our focus on the non-civilian, approach is super important, and changing the way police respond, super, super important. But we're still lacking that model for when the situation goes absolutely sideways, and how do we ensure that a person is, that the outcome isn't inevitable. Like how do we get somebody suffering from schizophrenia with a knife? How do we make sure that they don't fall prey to very rigid and very two-dimensional lethal force guidelines? Okay, so I think it's a change on both sides. I think the people who support community intervention and mental health and police have got to get together in a room and figure out something different, because right now we're trying to draw lines in the sand. Well, community response will deal with these calls and police will deal with these calls, but that's not the solution, and I don't think.
I know you said we weren't going to spend a lot of time on Chief Smythe, but I'd like to spend some time on that comment, because I would actually disagree with it. only because we've asked repeatedly for the exact number of hours that police get in de-escalation training. We've asked for all of that information, and we've been told to FIP it. And for me, I would think if it was adequate, you'd be singing its praises. So that's a problematic statement from off the bat. The other thing is, having spoken to other jurisdictions who are trying the civilian-led crisis response, they have said that at times they felt the police were actually undermining them. So, and I think it's very important that we have that conversation, and they have to be part of that conversation. But at the end of the day, some of that see it as a dollar figure. If we take tasks off of the police, they are going to get less money, and they don't like that. So that it is a conversation around that. But the other point that I wanted to make is that this conversation always reminds me of when I was much younger. I had a friend who was becoming a pilot. And this was his takeaway from one of his lessons, was this, I think it's, pilots say this, is like, any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. And I'm like, as the passenger, I have a higher standard. That is not adequate. And so that's when I go back to the idea of the police response, and Danny, Chief Smythe saying the idea that, and again, the use of force person saying, like, if everybody lived, that's a good outcome. Not if we've done damage. Not if we have furthered the damage to those folks.
Yeah, trauma.
Yeah.
Greg, I want to throw something at you. I mean, I'm working with judges at the moment, so and I think this is indicative of the situation that the police are in. And as a former officer, as someone who's now really seeing some of the other ways in which we can deal with some of these situations, particularly the downtown. So the judges have realized in Manitoba at the Court of King's Bench, they've realized that they are woefully inadequate for dealing with what is coming, which is Bill C-15 from the federal government, which is saying that Canadian law must come into concert with Indigenous rights. And so what that means is there's going to be a number of cases that are going to appear over the next decade, well, in perpetuity, really, that are going to talk about Indigenous rights, and you require competency. And the fact is that the judges in Manitoba have never been trained on Indigenous rights, don't even know really what it looks like. In many cases, let's say intellectual property is just an example, or like the issues of governance, of like who gets to decide who is a leader in a community. Is it a traditional leadership? Is it an Indian Act leadership? There's like a whole host of issues that judges in Manitoba have recognized that they are woefully unprepared for what is about to come, which is that we have a country that is going to, for the first time ever, say Indigenous rights matter, Indigenous peoples matter, and Indigenous perspectives matter. Now, what one of the recommendations that's come out of this training is that there needs to be Indigenous people sitting beside the judges, who can help them become better equipped and better knowledgeable with the decisions that they made. Well, the system's not built in any way for that. Right. In fact, it's the way that the justice system works is the judge is a one-stop shop with not allowed anybody to coerce or be seen as influencing decisions, because it then problematizes the objectivity of the judge as if they're objective in the first place. But we all know these are political appointments and so on. Anyways, don't get me into it.
You're safe to share your innermost thoughts here. You know, but you don't have to hold back. Yeah.
My point of it is that I want judges to make competent decisions. I want someone to sit beside them and help them. Right. But the problem is the system will punish those judges if they do that. Is that what's keeping the police from including, let's say, Indigenous peoples within what is situations in the downtown core? And I know the DCSP has a large amount of Indigenous peoples that are at the core. I almost noticed that every time you send somebody out, it's an Indigenous person and a non-Indigenous person, which I think is a very interesting way. I don't know if you've planned that, but I've noticed that it immediately deals with the issue of escalation involving people in the downtown. And then I also noticed that you're not really afraid of, tackling some of those really hard issues in mental health, which is that to give training adequately to people who are dealing with frontline. And we may not even see a police officer involved in that situation that they've just de-escalated.
Okay. I mean, I guess if anything, I could give you my own journey and how maybe you can do this when I started all this and started going that. And we have I've been extremely fortunate to have Indigenous counsel through all this, advisors, and I can name a few, but I won't. I think a lot of the people I talk to. We've recently built an extremely good relation with Red River Community College and sharing circles and smudges, and now starting a community walk along with the ones Mitch does on Mondays, Tuesdays. And I mean, there's no better way to learn than involved and listening to an elder, listening to the community, listening to my folks talk, and literally they train me every day on history, on what this means, what this looks like, everything that. So I don't know how that can relate to, in the judge. Like, we're dealing with institutions here that are, well, a blink of an eye.
Do you think a police officer would benefit from that?
No question. Absolutely.
At the front line?
Front line, absolutely. And again, if there's some place we can build on that, and I know from when I was there's opportunity to do sweat lodges or sharing circles and those types of things. I don't know how often. I don't know how much it's baked into the curriculum anymore. I've been gone for a while. I want to be careful. I don't know. But if there's a place to help build that, no question. And whatever institution there is out there.
Do you think they'd be able to apply it in a crisis situation? Again, I guess I'm going back to my earlier point about they even have conflicting training on officer safety, that sort of thing. Are they at that moment, and there's, again, we have these conversations very often, like what's the expression, culture eats policy.
Yeah.
And how do we get to that point where it is the culture of the police service, given they have these competing goals that they have to meet?
I think the quote is culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if your strategy is to incorporate this type of training or whatever that means, I don't even like to call it training, right? Like, this is just learning, like life skills. And what it does, it gives anybody a better perspective when they're going to make those kinds of decisions, what you're actually dealing with, what that person might bring to the table, an understanding of whatever generational traumas they would have been through, or whatever. Like, again, I'm sorry, I work with folks and I see it every day, and we do a great job to try and support that, right? And I think if people see it and learn it and talk and build that relationship, that trusting to know who that human is, it's going to have an effect.
I can tell you that having worked with police officers, I feel in many ways for them. And the reason is because they are at the end of colonialism.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And they are inheriting these decades and decades of people in the child welfare system that governments have chronically abused and assaulted, and that these individuals who, I really believe that police officers, when they enter the force, they're trying to help the community. They want to be people who are contributing. They want to be people who are trying to make the city a better place. I don't think I've ever met in all my travels a police officer who's like, I want to make this city a terrible place. They're these people who want to, contribute just like everybody else contributes. But they are put into situations that are 150 years in the making. And so, I think it's a travesty, and I think it's injustice that we then set them up in such a way that we are like, okay, bring in the most vociferous force of violence into a situation that has already been produced out of innate genocide and violence.
Thank you for that, because I can speak for myself. Most of the officers I know out there, they don't want to end up in these situations. They want to find better solutions and better ways to work. We talked a little bit, like, it's not just so we have, like, sorry, I'm going to get fragmented in thought here, but once you come to an incident, there's still somebody at the end of that needs help and support. And what does that look like, and where does that person go? So when we talk about things like, for us, like, that person, that human, is a number one priority. And then after that is, can we find a better spot? But how do we alleviate, when we talk about demands and strains on emergency service and all that, and we're finding we can do that. Like, we're actually very data driven, and we're starting to show that, and we'd like to be able to, share that, and because it's that proactive and get understanding.
The reality is they're not prepared, and they are not equipped. The reality is that they may not be the best served people for the job, and maybe they need help. Maybe they need someone standing beside them. Will the system, though, allow that, as I pointed out with judges, or will those police officers be punished? Will they be, I think the paranoia is they'll be defunded in some way. I don't actually think that's ever going to be a situation. I think that the reality is that what we need to do is we need to partner them with those community organizations that are already doing that work. And in many ways, we can see some real synchronicity of people dealing with the same people, but in much different ways, and to get the best outcome possible.
I think again, like, if you do like a broad scan of studies and news stories from across the world on this issue, you come up to the same thing over and over and over again, which is, like, we're trying to drive and remove screws with a hammer. and why are we doing that? Well, the hammer is what we've always used. So, we have a new situation or we have a new awareness of, let's say, mental health and addictions crisis. We're still trying to use the hammer, and we're trying to fit those square problems into round holes. I think that there are some of these issues, quite frankly, are not just the same. I would say even more acute in the United States, where officer-involved shootings are so common, and for a variety of all the wrong reasons. There are slow little oasis of cultural change where individuals and then larger groups of people in law enforcement are saying, okay, well, maybe we're willing to share. I mean, Greg, you and I talked about in TV and movies, there's always this scenario, and you were a negotiator for a time where, there's a hostage situation and you got the SWAT team on the one side and you got the black sheep cop who's been trained as a hostage negotiator and this conflict between the classic police response and an updated police response. And, the funny thing is, I don't know how real that situation is, but that conflict is very real. But when you, again, to your point, when you realize that the cops don't really want to be using the same response all the time. I have a lot of, police friends. They don't want to be involved in this, and they don't want people to think that they're always a hammer, right? They're never a screwdriver. So, maybe we just need to, maybe we need to make sure that there is somebody from Winnipeg Police Service always at the table.
Yep. Agreed.
They are at most tables, and I'm sorry if I'm appearing like ACAB is not something that's in my language. I don't actually use that expression. But I think that term partnership, for the folks out there who either love or hate the Christmas movie Love Actually, it always reminds me when we start talking about this, when he's standing up to the president of the United States and says, oh, that word relationship is always very interesting. Partnership is when we're talking with the police, is a difficult concept. And we have tried multiple times through very different coalitions. And the police are at the table. And as soon as you get down to trying to make a change, the answer is no, we can't do that. So the issue, we have to get past that in order to be able to create that change, because currently the situation, from my perspective, partnering with the Winnipeg Police Service means they are the senior partner and you are the junior partner.
Exactly. There's a culture within the organization too. And that culture, I think, really feeds into some such problematic ways that the training gets involved in, and it's very ornamental. I mean, you sitting in a sharing circle will not deal with racism.
No.
Greg and Kate, thanks. Not easy stuff, not easy conversations. We're happy to play a small part in having the conversation continue. But I also think too, my hope is that, at least the Winnipeg Free Press and other news media, we're actually, I think, finally getting deeper into these stories. I'm not saying that we've done our job as well as we could have so far, but we're trying to spend more time in understanding what's happening. And I do think that the watershed, the introduction of a new police chief in the near future, is going to be a moment to sort of start at the inception of that tenure and sort of say, okay, show me the partnership. Show me the partnership.
An essential part of the vision of the new police, the police chief, and that what do we do in a way that might be different than the hammer. And looking at more solutions involving the screwdriver. Yeah.
Well, as we close our toolbox up for another week, anyways, Kate.
Huge Miigwech, thanks for your time.
Kate and Greg, thank you.
Really, brave work that you're both doing at the front lines of our community. And, as someone out there walking the streets with you, it's just an honor to be able to work with people who love the city so much. And I hope that you come back.
Would love to, and not just this, but overall, justice is a long conversation. It's not a soundbite conversation, and so it's appreciated that you put a longer platform together so we can really have the conversation. That's what's necessary, so that we don't shut down. We don't do that. My side, your side. We actually can meet and have the fulsome conversation. Yeah.
Well, and we also work on the basis that people have a lot more fun here than they thought they were going to have. That it was a lot less scary than it might have been. So, Yeah, we got that going for us too.
I don't know. Adam scared me. I
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah, Adam's a pretty scary producer.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks a lot to both of you. And let's plan on getting back together with maybe one other person at the table to talk about how we're going to do it better.
Thank you for
Good.
having me. Appreciate it.